Hello, welcome.
Hello, welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers,
And I'm Margaret Schaus.
and we are both licensed therapists, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. What this is just an open conversation. Margaret and I are here talking with one another and with all of you. In the absence of any other information, we're just doing our best to make our guesses about who you are and what you're interested in talking about or hearing about and how we're coming across to you, how we're impacting you. For those of you who are willing and able, we encourage people to participate in the chat because that gives us more information on which to base those guesses about who you are and what you're interested in, how we're impacting you. If that is the case, please don't hesitate or worry about whether your comments are on topic or not on topic. That's not how any conversation works. We just go where we go. We work with a private therapy practice called Effective Artistry. We do individual, couples, family, and group therapy with people in the states of Illinois and Wisconsin. Our physical office is located in Northbrook, Illinois. We also work with a few executive functioning coaches. We can work with people all over the world via the internet. Some of those coaches have additional specialties. Welcome. I have arrived. Chat is live. Oh, wait, that's another thing to point out is that we try to read out comments because we're streaming on 3 different platforms simultaneously, and you only see the comments from the platform you're on. So to keep everybody on the same page, we try to read out comments as we see them. Welcome, Best Insider.
Did you finish your thought about the group practice?
Oh, yeah. So we work with a few executive functioning coaches who can work with people all over the world via the internet. In addition to executive functioning, some of those coaches have additional specialties in parent coaching or business coaching or creativity coaching.
I think that's it.
That's it. And I think I'm going to stop this from continuing. My electric kettle, if I accidentally leave it on the keep warm setting, it makes a noise every so often that's annoying. Is there anything else I'm supposed to say? I think that's.
I was going to say anything about the comments, but you got it. Went to remote sup. Oops.
Oh, supervision.
Oh. I was like,
Fritz is one of our coaches we were just talking about. He's also my father. He's been a business coach, executive coach for decades. It's part of how I first got interested in this work was talking with him about the things that he was doing a long time ago and works with us now, which is exciting. Yeah.
I think you got it.
Okay. How are you?
Oh, I'm tired today. Woke up. It's funny. I think I said this last time. How I woke up today late meaning 9 o'clock, which is normally not late for me. But woke up a little off schedule and just a little all over the place.
At what point did that become late for you? Like 9 o'clock is now waking up late. When did that?
Probably a few months ago.
Sure. Cool.
2-3 months ago. I can't believe I'm the same. This is me saying this, but I never was a morning person, and now I normally wake up at like 7:30 or 8. So 9 o'clock is, I think on the weekend I slept till 10, and I was like, oh my God, my whole day. And I'm like, I used to sleep till like 2 p.m.
That's great, man. Kids changes things a lot. Where I slept till 7:30 today. I was like, oh, I slept in a bit.
7:30 sleeping in for you?
Yeah, which, it's getting to the point where 7:30 isn't unusual, but the kids have been up for an hour and we got to get them to school like 45 minutes after that. And my wife has been, especially since the start of this school year, has been very amazing and helpful and supportive in taking on. We historically have tried to kind of split those morning things like half and half-ish, but now she's pretty much doing everything to get them ready and get them off to school in the morning, which
go Susan.
Yeah, good for her and good for me. I really appreciate it because I am also not a morning person, but what is morning kind of changes based on.
I don't know why that surprises me. Maybe because for as long as I've known you, you've been up, I guess, early. But I don't know. I can't picture you sleeping in late.
Oh, it's been, not since we've had kids, so it's been 9 years. But yeah, used to be, I mean, I could sleep late with it. When I first moved to Chicago, I didn't have a job. I was fortunate to be able to work a job that allowed me to like save up enough money over the course of 4 months that I had like some runway.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved out here to be an actor. And so I was doing shows, but wasn't like picking up a day job for the first, I don't know, few months, maybe 3 or 4 months. And there was a period during that window where like every night I went to bed later and later and later and later until I was going to bed at like 7 a.m. and sleeping until like 6 p.m. And usually when I tell this story, I make it sound like I just cycled all the way around. Like then I went to bed at 8 and then whatever. But no, once I got to that point, I was like, I gotta like not go to sleep today. You know, 7, like one day came where it was 7 a.m. and I hadn't slept. I'm like, I just gotta stay up until later so that I can get back on somewhat of a regular schedule.
That's crazy.
No, I much prefer, I'm definitely a night person, night owl, which is more common for people who share certain things in common with you and I.
I've been thinking a lot lately about how to frame my goals for next year. I tend to think about my mental health goals in terms of building capacity. Like I want to be able to achieve more at work. So to build that capacity, I'm working on shoring up. Oh my God, I can't read. Shoring up support mechanisms like sleep, diet, exercise. I'd be curious to hear what you think about that phrasing. Or we could just say I need to level up to get more spell slots.
Sure. Well, that's a good, I like talking about it this way. And of course, as always, I'm always frustrating and being like, well, there's stuff in your question that like indicates different things than the specific thing you're asking about. But I'm going to try and keep it specifically on like the phrase of building capacity, which I think is a fine phrase. You know, like as with, I'm going to say any, probably not literally any, but as with any phrase, like there are potential downsides if it's used in certain ways. Like we always talk about, like a useful tool is really great as long as you're using it for the things for which it is useful. But all tools have limitations beyond which, if you try to use it for this, it'll make things worse. Right?
So when you say like the phrase, but like what would be I don't know if negative is the right word, but like a negative thought about using the building capacity phrase?
So let's use spoon theory terms for a minute, right?
Okay.
Where doing things requires a certain amount of spoons, which is wonderful. It's so good that so many people have been exposed to this concept of spoon theory. It's been very helpful for so many people. Some of the limitations, not to say that it's bad or wrong, but some of the limitations of that is that there's nothing contained in that theory talking about like how you regain spoons or how to determine like what kinds of things cost more or less spoons. So the built-in assumption is the one that everybody has, which is just like you wake up in the morning with however many in spoon theory, right? Like you wake up with X number of spoons for the day. And once you run out for the day, you're out.
And there's no way of like restoring it or resting or anything like that.
Yeah, and it's not that nobody talks about that. I couldn't say if they do. I have not seen people talk about it that way, but I'm not like delving into every corner of the conversation. The general way it's talked about, there's just no discussion of regaining spoons. It's only, do I have spoons and how much spoons is something going to cost me? But this is also just a general thing because there are obvious reasons why we all break things up by like the day, you know, going to sleep for the night and then waking up in the morning. That's a new day. It's a very useful way to contain things. So the idea of building capacity, one of the ways of thinking about that would be like almost like I'm adding more spoons. You know, I have 100 spoons currently, but I can do these things that makes it so that when I wake up in the morning, I'll have 150 spoons now. Building does not include in it the concept of maintaining. You know, that like once I acquire this this additional capacity, do I just have it or do I have to continue to do things to do it? Which again, you're asking me about what are some of the potential limitations. This is not me saying that this is a bad term or a bad way of thinking. It's a perfectly fine way of thinking about it, but these are some of the like the way I try and talk about this. It's kind of like if you have a friend telling you that they drive their car and like the the oil light, check oil light comes on. They're like, oh, that doesn't mean anything.
Mhm.
You're like, wait, do you not like ever check oil or add oil or change oil? They're like, no, you don't need to do anything like that. In the moment, it's fine. It hasn't caused them a problem, right? But if you have some different ideas, in this case, knowing more about oil and how that works in a car, you then have an awareness of like, ooh, if they keep thinking this, it's going to cause them a problem later. Like I have a high level of confidence that this will cause them a problem if they keep thinking that oil does nothing and they don't need to do anything about it. But it can be difficult then in the moment to be like, oh, you need to change the oil. No, I don't. It's not a problem. It's just the light. I can ignore the light. It's no big deal, whatever. Same kind of deal when we're talking about language. That's our specialty as therapists, is interpersonal communication, language, both interpersonal language, but also internal language that people use. There's all these little things that, like, if we play it out, this can cause an issue in this future scenario or in this case. That doesn't mean it's not useful here and now. And if we try and go about it like that, then nobody can say anything with it because everything has its limits, right?
Yeah.
So building capacity, your goal is that you want to be, your actual goal here is that you want to be more productive at work. Your theory then about how you can make it so that you can be more productive at work is if you improve what you're calling your mental health in the specific way that you're referring to as building capacity, meaning doing whatever things, and some of your theories are changing things like sleep, diet, and exercise, which are all good things to think about. The theory is that if you change some of those things as well as whatever additional things, then you'll increase your capacity, by which you kind of mean, I'm assuming, something akin to like energy, the ability to focus and take productive action on tasks at work, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to believe. It is likely true. Now, whether or not it's true is separate from whether or not it is helpful. Sometimes we have theories about things that are hypothetically true, that if we were to do it, it would help with the thing. But that doesn't mean that we can do it. And then that can become a problem. But either way, you're just saying you want to be more productive at work, and that you want to build the ability, you want to increase your ability to be more productive at work, presumably via like being able to focus more and engage in productive effort in a more sustained, consistent way.
I don't know why it makes sense why I'm thinking about this. Like when we talk about like the accomplishment equation and like the cost and the value and everything like that, like after learning that, like even hearing terms of like building capacity or like opening up more rooms in the mansion or whatever, do you feel like because we focus on the accomplishment equation so much that those other ways of looking at it, like it's almost like automatic, we're gonna find like a downside to it because there's no like rest or restore or...
Well, like I said, language is abstract and imperfect. It in order to exist, in order to do what it does, it must be an imperfect container for meaning. You can't ever use language to convey exactly what it is that you mean. So we can always find limitations, especially the more abstract it is, the way that the person is describing something, the more that's abstract or generalized or intellectualized, the more we're going to be able to point out like, well, here are potential downsides of that.
Right.
In this case, Bast Insider is talking about resting and recovering. They're separating things into two different categories. One is like productive work stuff. That's where you build the capacity in order to be able to do that. And then the other is the stuff that you do in order to build capacity, which is what we talk about. It's not exactly the language that we talk about it in necessarily, but like you have to do some stuff to earn the resources in order to be able to spend those resources on other things.
Yeah.
Hold on, I missed a couple comments there. Bast, I've discovered recently that the anti-inflammatory diet has leveled me up to boss monster level in almost every area of my life. From rising as late as 10, I'm consistently getting up at 6. Productivity has increased, energy has increased because working out has increased, like going on a Japanese walk at 8. And then Bast Insider says, yeah, I think using a term like building capacity makes it feel more like working out. So it feels more like a slow process that requires work and practice over time, which feels more productive to me. Yes, that is, productive is not exactly, it can mean different things, but when we're talking about making changes to ourselves or to an individual, yes, the most impactful and sustainable changes are going to be ones that happen over a long period of time. The simplest way to put it is like consistent effort over time. So a little bit every day is going to do a lot more in terms of changing an individual than doing a lot in one day.
What was the anti-inflammatory diet? Is that what it said?
Yeah, that was from Coach Fritz.
Oh,
Talk about an anti-inflammatory diet. Which, yes, anti-inflammatory. Don't forget 8 hours of sleep has helped much. Thanks. I'll have to talk to my dietitian about that. Yes, anti-inflammatory diet. There are lots of specialty diets, Mediterranean diet, all of which I think at least potentially can be useful to look into.
I mean, productive as in like it's a helpful way to look at it that supports my goals.
Yeah, again, small changes made over time is the best way to produce like sustainable and impactful goals. That we have that phrase, Rome wasn't built in a day, right? Mm-hmm. The idea that the greater that something is, the longer it will take you to accomplish it. So anything that can be done quickly is not going to be nearly as large or as impactful as something that takes time.
Mm-hmm.
And when you switch to thinking about it in that way, then yes, it becomes more efficient. Instead of I'm going to do as much as possible every single day. Well, that's not sustainable. So then we're looking at what's sustainable. What's the maximum amount I can do in a day, which allows me to still do that same amount the next day, not a little bit less.
I don't know. This just reminds me of like if you had told me 3 years ago, you're going to get up at 7:30 and have all this routine and go work out, I'd be like, you're out of your mind. But I feel like, I don't know, after talking about this, like Rome wasn't built in a day, like the amount of times I tried to be like, okay, I'm going to set a schedule and this week I'm going to go to the gym this many times and I'm going to eat this and I'm going to do this. And then it would just crash and burn. And it's weird we're talking about this right now because me and my fiance were talking yesterday and I just hit my 70th Pilates class of the few months and been doing really good with diet and everything. And he's like, how did you have this stick? Like, how did it finally stick this time? Because I've tried so many ways of, bettering my mental health and just was never sticking. And I feel like I had to be super gradual with it. Like only going once a week for a few weeks, then twice a week, incorporate so small. And I remember at the time being like, this is never going to happen. And now it's like my life's done a complete 180 in a matter of 4 months just by me like chipping away at it.
That's great.
Which has been pretty cool. Accomplishment equation has also helped significantly with a new perspective. I find more satisfaction, which creates more enthusiasm, which creates more satisfaction.
Yeah, that's great. And those things certainly are true, as is the opposite cycle where disappointment leads to despair, which leads to disappointment. What we want to take a look at, or at least what we're trying to talk about, is the mechanisms by which that happens. That's kind of like if someone were to say, like, I did X and now I'm making more money, which made everything easier, which made it easier to make more money, which made everything easier, which is great. But that question then is like, oh, what is it that you did that made you more money? Or how exactly did it enable you to make more money? How did it enable you to feel more satisfied? We're looking at the outcome. Satisfaction is the result of some processes. That's how we monitor. If I'm feeling satisfied or dissatisfied, that's the response to some things that have happened. And does then things which are satisfying or enjoyable in various ways, I am more incentivized to continue to utilize those strategies, and therefore we can call that enthusiasm, right? I want to do this more and it works more. So let's talk first about, because the first question started with talking about setting goals for the coming year. So let's talk about setting goals versus setting aims versus setting an intention.
Okay.
Because what you're talking about, I would say, is the result of setting an intention, and that's the point we really want to get to for this question. So quickly, the biggest issue with goals is that they are binary. They can be failed or accomplished, and that's pretty much it, right? If you set a goal to work out 3 times in a week, and you do work out 3 times in that week, you accomplish your goal. If you work out 2 times that week, you failed to accomplish your goal. If you work out 0 times, you also failed.
Yeah.
It's not to say that we're not, like, people are not fools, and we are aware that working out twice might be better than working out none at all, if that's what you're going for. But it actually doesn't really work out that way in practice. If you set it as a goal, you do tend to monitor in the same way that when I say, like, have you tried setting an alarm or whatever? And people say, yeah, that doesn't work. That doesn't typically mean 100% of the times I tried it, it did not result in the way I wanted it to go. usually it means like I tried it and some number of times it helped out, but some number of times it did not help out.
Mhm.
And so then I'm like, oh, this doesn't work. And I threw the whole thing away. So that's why we want to talk about setting aims instead of setting goals. This is what you're aiming at.
Mhm.
The difference being when you're aiming at something, each attempt, whether successfully hitting what you aimed at or missing, you have to monitor the specifics of the results of that attempt. Did it get me closer or further away? Instead of just, did I do it or not do it?
So if you're setting an aim, then are you trying to say it in a way that's not binary? Like I would like to work out, period? Or like,
No, you can still aim. Setting an aim is not categorically different than setting a goal.
okay.
You could still say I'm aiming to work out 3 times a week.
Mhm.
The difference is if I'm aiming at something, we're tapping into language that people already use, right? So one of the things that we talk about is changing the meaning that someone has connected to a piece of language is incredibly difficult. We've already created meaning. That means there's a symbol, the word, or whatever,
Mhm.
and then there's the concepts that symbol represents, and the connection there, we call that meaning. This is what this word means. It's this stuff. If I already have a symbol connected, it already means something to me. Getting it to mean something different is really difficult.
Yeah.
At best, what we do is we make it so that it means something additional. We don't get rid of the original meaning.
Mhm.
We just add one on, which leaves us with that same problem we always talk about with conflation, is where even in the moment I might know I mean this new additional meaning, but later on, because of how memory and recall works, I don't remember which one I meant, and it all just kind of goes back.
I get an aim at a target. If miss, adjust until target is hit.
Oh yeah, my goals are going to
my
be much
bad.
more concrete when I flesh them out. I'm looking at things like I want to try and get at least X amount of sleep on Y number of days out of the year. So that's great. It is good to have concrete goals, but I want to be clear that that's not what I'm talking about right now. I like having numbers that show my progress so I can color in a pretty tracker. Yeah, which again is great. And SMART goals is the most like commonly discussed way of making sure that you're setting goals that are like, to be clear, SMART goals are established that way because it is the best way to set goals that involve more than one person being able to communicate with one another about it. For an individual to set goals, you can set goals that aren't measurable or whatever. And it's not to say there's no impact of that, but it's not as important, still useful, and it's great to be concrete. But when we're talking about aims versus goals, all we're talking about is what do you do with a failed attempt?
Mhm.
With a failed attempt at accomplishing a goal, you log it as a failure that didn't work, and you move forward. With a failed attempt to hit what you were aiming at, you log it as a failure, because it's not that an aim isn't a binary thing. You either hit what you're aiming at or you don't.
Okay.
But because of the meanings we have associated with goals versus the meanings we have associated with aim, instead of trying to get people to change how they perceive what happens with a goal and what does failure mean, we switch to a different word that already taps into some of that stuff.
Okay.
And when I say aim, especially if I evoke, like, imagine aiming at a bullseye on a target, that's an experience that people either have or at least are likely to be very aware of the concept of. And that then we add on this little piece of, so what you're doing, this isn't adding a new meaning, this is just clarifying the meaning. On each attempt to hit what you're aiming at, you are making some attempt, you get a result, you observe the result. If it's what you were aiming at, you just try and remember what it is you just did and do it again. If it's not what you were aiming at, you come up with a new and different idea of what to try. But whether this result was further away from what I was aiming at or closer changes how I'm going to modify my attempts.
No, that makes sense, but I feel like, I don't know, I think for me, like, because I haven't put it into practice, but for me, if I were to make a goal versus make an aim, even though, like, I know you're saying they're both failures, but at least with an aim, you can adjust and see how far or close you are to the target. I still feel like I'm still going to feel like, I don't know, like a failure. I feel like I don't know if changing the word is.
It doesn't solve everything. It doesn't. It's better, but yeah. We'll talk about, I also tell people not to make plans, which is like a specific way of wording it to try and get people's attention on something.
So what's the intention part then?
So setting an intention is a completely different thing. Setting an intention is not establishing what's the thing that I'm aiming to do, like, and if I do it, I've succeeded. And an intention is a thought. not all thoughts are intentions, but all intentions are thoughts, right? Not all birds are ducks, but all ducks are birds. Intention is a thought. I am going to whatever. Not I'm going to try to accomplish, or I'm aiming at, or I'm setting a goal for, but intending like, no, I'm going to. And it's in the absence of being able to talk about it in a more complicated way, you can literally just say those words to yourself. I'm going to go to Pilates classes, whatever. Once you've set that intention, because the reality, like the most impactful versions of this is not literally just saying the words. There's a way of thinking that everybody experiences where it's not like something I'm considering or thinking that would be beneficial to do. It's like, I'm going to do this thing. If you ever set an intention for something that can be executed on immediately in the moment, you do it unless you can't afford to do it. But a lot of time we're setting an intention for something that like, it's not going to happen right now, can't even happen right now, but I intend to do this. At 7 o'clock tonight, I'm going to whatever. Having that thought, I'm going to X, is setting the intention. Does it mean that you will? It does not.
Okay.
Does it mean that it's more likely that you will than you would be if you hadn't set the intention? 100% absolutely.
So then what's the difference between setting an intention and setting a goal?
Setting a goal or an aim is a replacement for goal, but doing that is a process of trying to measure, like, what's the thing I'm trying to accomplish? And then we can come up with all kinds of theories and whatever about strategies to try to get there. Setting an intention is just, I'm going to do this thing.
Okay.
So, and yes, sometimes you're going to set an intention that you're going to think of the same, right? Like, I'm setting an intention to get an A, which is great. That it's not that that's a bad thing, and that's the same. But there's other times where the intention is not something that you're like, I'm going to go get a cup of water right now. It's not something that you would think of as like a goal you're trying to accomplish. The way that resources are allocated, like the way that our bodies, including our nervous systems, work, is we're trying to take into account everything that we can, right? At least in theory, there is no such thing as a piece of information that it wouldn't be better for me to have that piece of information than not. In practice, I can't have every piece of information, and the vast majority of information I've identified as like not a big deal. It's not really going to affect me one way or the other, even if we really break it down. Like, of course, there's no information that I'm like, there's no situation in which having that information might be beneficial, especially because you can't know because you don't have it. So we allocate these resources via these processes. One of the things that impacts the processes that allocate resources is setting an intention. So if I say to myself, another comment, my married adult daughter is fearful of side effects in taking psychiatric medication for anxiety, OCD, depression. How can I help? That's a good question. Let me finish up this thought and then we can switch over to that. If I set an intention, then the things which I notice I'm more likely to notice things that would be relevant to whether or not that's going to happen, right? If I'm like, I want to make a friend, I'm going to make a friend at this party tonight. Then when I go out, I'm more likely to be paying attention to the cues that somebody might be a good friend or that they might be open to talking or becoming friends. Again, it doesn't mean that you will notice it. And it also doesn't mean that if you hadn't set the intention, it wouldn't have happened. It just is a way of guiding your resources.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so there are things, we'll try and make this relatively quick because I want to get to that other question too. Take a task, let's say writing this, doing this homework assignment, same task. Based on other things, based on the context, how efficient it is for me to do that fluctuates. There are times where if I were to do that at this time in this context, it's going to be much more costly and difficult than if I were to do it at this other time.
Yeah.
It's harder to do your homework when you're like at a concert with everybody, loud music and partying and whatever. It's easier to do it when you're in a quiet space, whatever. So theoretically, what's most efficient is to assign each task, like do each task in the context in which it is the most effective and efficient to do that task. Instead of forcing yourself to do your homework at the concert, you're going to wait to do the homework until you're somewhere quiet. And while you're at the concert, you're going to socialize and enjoy yourself, whatever. Well, as soon as you set an intention to do something, like go to Pilates classes, there are times, days, there are contexts in which that's going to be something that is cheaper to do, and other times when it's going to be more expensive. There also is going to be a fluctuating amount of resources you have access to. Some days you have more resources available to do that kind of thing, other times less. There's also going to be fluctuation in the other things that are as important for you to do, where there could be a day where you have more resources and it's a cheap and easy day or whatever to go to Pilates, but there's this other stuff that's more important, and so you're doing that stuff instead.
Yeah.
So by setting an intention without turning it into a goal or an aim, we then give ourselves the opportunity for those processes to automatically identify like when it's a good time for this, I'm going to fit it in.
Yeah.
And that is the best way to do intentional change over the long term. The downside of it is that you don't have any control really over like this is going to take effect now. It could take years, it could take forever, it could never happen. The upside of it is that you're not forcing it into a place where it doesn't work well or sustainably. Whereas when you're making it effortful, I'm going to go to this thing today, whether it feels good or not or whatever. You run the risk of forcing yourself to do it at a time where it's not sustainable to do that thing. And so you do it once or twice and then it falls apart. Or B, you don't do it and now you feel bad because you've said it to yourself as like, this is something that I'll feel good if I do it, and I'll feel bad if I don't. That's part of why we want to not emphasize the idea of feeling satisfaction or how much it is very nice to have like colorful little things on charts to check off. It does feel really good to do those things. But when we're talking about that, we're emphasizing the feeling of how it feels to have not the thing itself inherently, just how it feels to accomplish the thing you intended to accomplish. The corollary to that then is that you feel bad if you don't. Even if the worst you feel is, I didn't get that good feeling that I would have gotten if I'd done it, that still sets you up to feel bad if you don't do it.
I guess I was setting an intention the whole time.
And yes, intentions, I'm not trying to give like full on instructions on how to do this effectively in this conversation. So it can be anything. It can be as specific or not specific as you want. But I'm just trying to draw attention to the difference between one is like, here's a thing that I've decided I'm going to try to accomplish. One is I'm going to do this, like the organization of energy and resources in your body that is required in order to execute something. So intentions, we do want it to be more stuff that we focus on that you can execute rather than like abstract things to accomplish or attain. We do want it to be less time bound or not time bound at all. Not that it can't ever be.
Yeah.
But especially with bigger changes like this, I want to sleep 8 hours a night. I'm going to sleep 8 hours a night. I'm going to sleep 8 hours a night. I don't know when. I don't know how. I'm not forcing it to happen. I'm not going to feel bad if I don't. But it is my intention. And my processes are paying attention to little things that I might otherwise miss. And it all adds up to stuff that I am more likely to come across an opportunity for it to work. So the thing you're talking about where your fiance is like, how did it stick? We all have these things where it's like, for years I've been trying to get myself to do this thing, and then all of a sudden something happened. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
That's the point. There are things that we're not intellectually paying attention to, that we don't notice on a conscious level, or if we do notice it, we don't connect it to how that might be impactful to this other thing that is impactful.
Do you want to go up to the question?
Let's read this comment real quick, then we'll go back to that question. Go ahead.
Okay. It helps me to have something like I want to have done 20 minutes of exercise for 120 days out of the year, because if I fell behind 1 week, I can try to catch up the next. And even if I don't reach that number, I can see that I practiced and worked on it through the year. One way or another, I exercise that doing muscle.
Yeah, and that is good. That's a better way of doing it for exactly the reason that, like, if you miss it for a week, you don't have to be like, oh, I failed. Unfortunately, if you don't do it for 120 days in the year, you still are going to end up feeling like you failed. And it won't just be happening at the end. It'll be like after you go a week, you're like, oh, I got time. After 2 weeks and you haven't done it, you're like, after 3 weeks, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to do, like, not to say that this doesn't work. It can work. But going back to the building capacity thing really quickly, and then we're going to talk about the other one. And if we have time, we'll come back to this stuff more. You have to earn the resources. Right? If you want to spend money, you have to acquire that money somehow. So if you want to do more things that require resources, you have to do more things that gain you those resources so that you have more of them, or you have to cut things out that you're currently spending those resources on. End of story. That's it. Those are the only options. If I'm going to spend more energy on X, I either have to do things that give me more energy altogether, or I have to stop spending that. I spend less energy on other things that are not X. And then talking about building capacity, you're talking about wanting to do the things that are required to have more energy to spend. That's a very useful way to go about this. It's one of the ways that we can then think of rest as productive, because we connect those things, and that's really useful. But pay attention to, at the end of the day, you, me, none of us have the capacity, not even theoretically, to be able to intellectually identify what resources we gain from something and what resources are cost. That doesn't mean it's not worth trying to get better at that. It's very useful to get better at understanding, like, is this a lot or a little? Does this help me recover or regenerate things? But you just have to know that, like everything else, there are things that go on beyond our ability to notice them or intellectually understand that they are even related, much less the specific ways in which they relate to things. So you want to be able to tap into impulse and intuition as well. A metaphor that I've used in the past is like, the ocean is very powerful. If you want to tap into that power, you need to stop before you do anything and observe, how does it work? What are the tides? How does it all go? Where are the currents before you try building? If you just jump in and try and build something, you might get lucky, and what you're doing does tap into that power. But you might also get unlucky, and what you're trying to build works directly against that power and makes it basically impossible to do anything. So there are patterns, there are cycles within your body, there are things that have to do with the context that you are not intellectually aware of. And that doesn't mean it's not worth trying to force something to happen intellectually. It just means that the more you do that, the more likely you are to like come to an idea about something that'll work that doesn't work. Where the more that you tap into intuition and impulse, the more likely you are to be able to. So it's more sustainable and more impactful, but also takes more time. The more you try and force it to happen by X, the more you set yourself up for making yourself do things in inefficient or unproductive ways. My married adult daughter is fearful of side effects of taking psychiatric medication for anxiety, OCD, depression. How can I help? That is very tricky. And I want to talk about, to the extent that we're able, like, what are some helpful ideas and concepts? But in the practical question of what do you in this situation do to help, the best I would suggest that you could help is to just try and help bring more clarity to the process. Meaning, we don't want to start with the assumption that those things will be helpful, which isn't to say that they won't. There's good reason, including research, to think that it is more likely that medication will help than that it won't. But if we start from the assumption that it would be better for someone to do these things than to not, then that means that we're approaching this in trying to like get them to do it. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily, not in like a controlling or manipulative, or like, we're trying to help, but we're trying to, even if we don't think of it as trying to convince them to do it, trying to enable them to do it is a different process that is more likely for it to result in whatever hesitations or concerns they have about it now get projected onto you and your relationship, and things get worse, right? That presumably she is already aware of the fact that these things could potentially help her, which is definitely worth, that's true. There's evidence for that. She's also already aware of the fact that there are at least the potential for side effects, mm-hmm. which is also true. We don't want to like downplay that. We don't want to try to promise her or get her to believe that those side effects won't happen, or that if they do happen, they won't be, they won't outweigh the benefits that they. It is entirely true that sometimes people take medication and it makes things worse, and there's no value to it. It is also true that people take medication and there's lots of value to it, and there's a high cost with the side effects. Sometimes that cost is worth paying. The value you get out of it is worth the side effect costs you're paying. Sometimes the side effects outweigh the cost. And in fact, with psychiatric medication, there's a process. This is not exclusive to psychiatric medication. There's a process called titration. Titration is when your doctor, your psychiatrist in this case, puts you on a treatment, and they're trying to find the optimal level of that treatment. Mm-hmm. So focused on psychiatric medication, they prescribe a medicine and they prescribe 10 milligrams a day. And we see, how does that impact you? For some period of time, we monitor, how does that impact you? What are the benefits? What are the side effects or other costs? How does that balance out? If you're getting more value than the cost you're paying in the side effects, and it seems reasonable to the doctor that you might be able to get even more benefit, then we up the dosage. Okay, 10's working, let's try 15, see if it's even better. And we repeat that process until and unless we get to a dosage where it's like, oh, increasing that dosage increased the side effects or the costs, but didn't increase the value. That's now we're saying, let's back up to the last one. That was the last time where we got like as much value with as little cost. Sometimes in increasing the dosage, we now are at a point where like, ooh, side effects that weren't happening before are, or side effects that were happening before have gotten a lot worse. And even if the value went up, not as much, and it's still not worth it. In other words, taking psychiatric medication is a process. Figuring out what medicine is going to help you and what is the right level of that medicine is a process. And it helps people, I think, to sign up for it knowing that if you take something and it's not going well, you tell your doctor and they adjust it. The doctor knows this. A psychiatrist knows that they cannot predict with 100% accuracy exactly what they have good reason to think that this is going to help you, but they can't know for sure. So the process is built around, we're trying this, tell me how it goes. And if you have side effects or if it's bad, you tell them and we make adjustments. That I think is maybe like the most helpful thing for someone who's not in like a position where the person is likely to see you as an authority on this process. I think that's the most helpful, is to just to empathize with, yes, understandable that we're talking about medicine that changes the way that you think and feel and behave. Like, who wouldn't be concerned about putting something in their body that in some way that you can't identify and can't control after you put it into your body might make you feel differently. Hopefully, obviously, we're trying to do it so that it makes you feel differently in a way that you want it. But the possibility exists that it makes you feel differently in a way you don't want it.
I think you kind of already said this, but my spin on it is like, from someone like myself who has been very nervous about trying different meds for anxiety, depression, all of that. And I realized that when I would be cautious or really worried about how it was going to affect me, I tried to look at it as kind of what you said, Brandon, about how being cautious is a good thing. Because I feel like there were times where how do I say this? Where I would be going to try a med and I'd be very hopeful and excited, which is good. But then it was like when things went not the way I wanted to, and I was feeling negative side effects and everything like that, I feel like it hit me a lot harder because I hate saying don't get your hopes up, but like I was almost, I guess, too hopeful. And kind of what you said, like, there is no 100% certainty that it is going to work. So I think, or in the way that you want. So I think being a bit cautious about it is a good thing.
Yeah. And I think emphasizing that this is a process that you're saying. In fact, with psychiatric medication, it's always important for a person to work with a doctor that like they feel confident this doctor is listening to me and they hear what I'm saying and they believe what I'm saying about my experience. And if that's not happening, it is worth going through a process of finding new doctors. Now, there are limits to the resources that people have available in terms of time and energy, and there's urgency, and there's only so many doctors. But to the extent that you're able, if you're working with a doctor that you don't feel as though they're listening to you and taking your feedback as like valid, you want to try and find a new one. I think that's even more important with a psychiatrist, because the entire point of psychiatric medication is that the results of that medication are not empirically measurable. If we put you on a medicine for your insulin levels, we can check your insulin levels to see what's going on. If we put you on a medication for depression, there's nothing we can look at to see is your depression worse or better than it was, other than for you to tell us about it.
Yeah. So
being able to communicate with your psychiatrist is important. And that's part of the process I'm talking about. Is the first part of that process is like making sure that you're talking. She should theoretically be able to talk to the doctor, explain her fears, her hesitations, and that doctor should be able to talk her through and help her to understand this whole process better than I or you can,
Yeah.
right? If when she meets with a doctor, she tries to explain this stuff and that doctor either doesn't address it or doesn't understand it, or the way they try to address it doesn't work, then maybe we try to find another doctor. Again, there are limits on what people can do. And so it's not to say that like everyone could just try new doctors infinitely, but as much as possible.
What are your thoughts though too on being able to like track how you're feeling too, like while you're starting the new medication?
So I do have thoughts about that, but that is stuff that like, and we'll talk about it, but I don't want to give the impression that I think that that's something that would likely be helpful coming from your mother explaining it to you.
Mm-hmm.
It could cause problems coming from that. Because at the end of the day, like I'm saying, there's reason for her to be worried. There's reason for her to be fearful. That doesn't mean that it's not worth trying, but it does mean that it's not irrational to be concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I started with, we don't want to start with the assumption that we should try to get them to do it. If we do, even if we effectively get them to do it, that's very risky. What if it goes poorly and now they identify that as like being because we forced them to or convinced them to? But mostly because if she's experiencing anxiety, OCD, depression, she's already to some extent considering that her own thoughts and feelings about things are inappropriate, irrational, crazy, whatever, like I shouldn't be as anxious or depressed as I am. Well, if I'm anxious about taking medication and other people are saying you're more anxious than you should be, it's not even necessarily that that isn't in some way true. I mean, we wouldn't be able to identify, but theoretically, even if that was a true statement, it's not going to help the process, because part of this is already that I'm like, you're right. My anxieties are, you're right. I'm too anxious about stuff. And maybe I should just figure out how to not be so anxious about things instead of like trying to get medication. We want to empathize and join with this person, bond with them about like, yeah, there's reason to be worried, which is why I think it's really important that if you think that it's worth exploring, which it sounds like in this case, there's at least some belief that it is worth exploring, that we just take this slow. We meet with a doctor, we talk through our concerns, and that doctor can say all kinds of things that might be helpful. Like, not that I'm going to get into the details, not even that I would be able to with expertise do that, but like there are some medications that like, even if this does cause a side effect, it's going to be something that like happens gradually and we'll be able to detect it and get off it really quickly, where other medications, it's like the side effects that could potentially happen on this one happen real quick all at once, and that could be scarier for a person. Or this medication is one that like by the time it's taken effect, if we decided to change it or get off it, it would be a 2 to 4 week process of getting off it. That's going to be scarier for somebody to commit to, as opposed to something that's like, just try it for a day. It impacts you for 12 hours. If it doesn't go well, it's over after 12 hours and we move on, whatever. But yeah, for you to just empathize, that makes sense. It's worth considering because it really could help. It's also worth being cautious.
Yeah.
It could cause problems. It could help and also cause problems. It could help and cause problems that are still worth taking it anyway.
Right. It's not binary.
Yeah. So we'll take it slow. We'll go through this together. It is not, it's funny, I was going to say it's not medicine, which obviously it's funny in this case because we're talking about medication that we call medicine, but meaning that this science, this field is not medicine. It is not, these are not diseases, they're disorders, which isn't about like stigma or severity or whether they're good or bad things. It's just to say there is not a measurable pathophysiology. There's not something we can measure objectively and empirically to see how these things are working.
Yeah.
Fortunately, with these things, it's not to say that this is not an important or urgent thing in the sense that it would improve quality of life, but there's not a deadline on these things, right? Whatever she's been dealing with, she's been dealing with it, and we don't need to rush. And that sometimes is part of the issue, is that people are hesitant or have their qualms or whatever, and things get worse and worse and worse and worse. And then by the time they decide to explore it, they're at a place where it's like, I can't, I'm done. Like, I don't care about it. I just need something. And then they can rush the process a bit.
Yeah.
So empathize, support, and just reinforce, like, maybe you're right and we'll find out. But you can't find out unless you try. If you don't try, you can't have the bad side effects, but you also won't ever be able to stop thinking about whether it might be worth it. For some people, that thought pops up every once in a while. It's not a big deal. Some people, they're thinking about all the time, like, should I try it?
Mm-hmm.
And that thought won't go away until you try it.
Yeah.
It does have side effects. Those side effects are known. These are very robust studies, and we do a lot to make sure that we're taking people through this carefully and slowly. Psychiatrists can explain this process better than I, but they have things in place, safeguards and procedures to make sure that we're doing this as best we can.
Yeah.
Having said that, there's this other piece that, again, I'm not sure that necessarily you sharing will help, but worth, I think, knowing, and it connects back to the other thing, which is, for a fun piece of language to help people remember this, we can call this the subject-object shift. There are many of these. This is one of the subject-object shifts, is that people get this idea that I am my thoughts and I am my feelings. And so anything that changes my thoughts and feelings is something that like can make me be different than I was.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people's concerns about medication is even, or can't even be, well, maybe it will help me to be less depressed or less anxious, but then maybe I won't be myself anymore.
Yeah.
The idea, for example, of like, oh, it helps you to be less depressed, but it numbs you out and you don't like feel things or want things anymore. Again, not to say that that doesn't match anyone's experience, but that narrative reinforces this idea of like it, to some extent, makes you less of the person that you are. More of an automaton or a robot or
Muted.
Muted or neutral or just a generic human instead of the human that you are with your wants and feelings. And while that is an understandable concern to have, and it is true, obviously, that if medication can diminish the intensity of depressed or anxious feelings, medication can also diminish the intensity of excitement or whatever. Of course, we're trying to use medication that doesn't do the latter.
Yeah.
And those things are not inherently linked. It doesn't have to be true that if something reduces how depressed I feel, it must also reduce how excited I feel. That everybody knows that you can, even if we're just talking about alcohol, even if we're just talking about food, everybody knows that there's stuff that you can put into your body that changes how you feel in one regard, but doesn't change how you feel about something else. These are not inherently linked things. But that, I think, can be very helpful. Is it also goes along with what you were talking about, how to monitor these things.
Okay.
Is to be able to step to the side and say, like, the thoughts I have are thoughts that I observe. They're not me and who I am. They're not what I believe and what I desire. They're just thoughts that I then notice these thoughts. And I can evaluate whether I like or don't like them.
Yeah.
The feelings that I have, that's not me. It's feelings that come up for me that I can then observe. And the same thing, then, if I take something and it changes the way I feel, well, that doesn't change me. It changes the feelings. Or if it changes the way I think, it changes the thoughts. And I can still observe those thoughts and determine to what extent I might like this new way of thinking or this new way of feeling better. I might not like it, but I am not a prisoner in my own mind that, like, if I take this medicine now, I'm stuck, because I'll be like, oh, this is better, even though that's not really me thinking it's better. It's the medicine making me think that it's better. And that's just...
What's this called again? What did you call it?
The subject-object shift is to shift from thinking that I am my thoughts, I am the things that I am conscious of, to I am the thing that observes those things.
I like that. I need to adopt that.
It's helpful, tricky, but helpful.
Yeah.
And we got to get wrapping up. But that same thing comes back to this, like, talking about goal setting or building capacity or whatever. In certain types of philosophy, we call this the observer, the self that is the observer. You know, people have explored these things and broken it down into different parts. There's a thought experiment of, like, sing the alphabet song in your head. All right, were you the one singing or were you the one listening to the song? Just to draw people's attention to the fact that, like, I guess I'm kind of doing multiple, like, I'm both making it and observing it. What that means then is that, like, the conscious observer part, what we're doing is evaluating, not generating, but evaluating. There are things about us that do generate these thoughts. That's not the conscious observer, though. Whatever generates those thoughts generates them and presents them to the conscious observer. The I that we're talking about is the observer. And so we can do all kinds of things that influence how we evaluate what's being presented to us. And of course, we can do things that if we evaluate things differently, that gets us to do things differently or think or feel different things. And that's the only lever we have to pull. So effectively, the more that we're like, I like this consciously, the more likely we are to experience that thing. This is a known phenomenon. Unfortunately, the more that we think, I don't like this, also the more likely we are to experience that. It's also a known phenomenon. What's actually happening in that case is we're saying, this is important to notice. Whether it's a good or a bad thing, it's important for me to track it. And so I pay more attention to it. And that works that way because it is true, at least sometimes, that it is important to track it, even if it's unpleasant.
Yeah.
So the ultimate aim of all of this is not to just experience only pleasant experiences. It's to survive and thrive. And unpleasant and difficult experiences are obviously helpful in that, or we wouldn't have the capacity to have unpleasant and difficult experiences. So talking about exercising that doing muscle, it is true, at least in theory it's true, but there is some research about a particular part of the brain. Every time a person does something, it becomes easier to do that thing again in the future. That's pretty much 100% across the board. So every time I have a thought or set an intention of doing something and then do it, it is at least theoretically true that I become better at executing on intentions,
Right.
which is great. It becomes easier, and as things are easier, I do them more frequently because they cost less. Downside of that is that that does not bake in any evaluation of whether or not the idea of what you think would be good to do actually is good to do or not. So in other words, what you're talking about is making it so that when I have an idea to do something, I think about whether or not that's a good idea less and just move into doing it more quickly, which is really great when you're confident that it is a good idea.
Yeah.
But sometimes that confidence is misplaced, and we want to also evaluate. That's why where I would originally back up and start with is observe the tides first, right? Whatever you're doing right now, you're doing for reasons. That doesn't mean you can't change it. It doesn't mean that it's not worth changing. It's always worth changing, and it is always possible to change it. But that means whatever is happening for reasons. And if you try and just change stuff without figuring out at least some idea of what function it's currently serving to do it this way, then you're not very likely to have success. Because you might accidentally stumble on something that works, but pretty likely that it won't work. And there's a risk that it will make things worse. So being more of anything, doing more of anything, paying more attention to something means that you are taking away from something else. If I pay more attention to this, I'm paying less attention to this. If I'm doing this more, there's other stuff that I otherwise was doing that I'm doing less of. And that's part of what you need to pay attention to. If you want to do this building capacity thing, it is true. Focusing more on sleep, diet, exercise, as well as a bunch of other things that we can talk about in more specifics if we want to follow up on this conversation. Make it so that you are able to focus and have more energy to do productive tasks, at least theoretically.
Brandon, I'm sorry, I do have to get going.
Yeah, we got to wrap up. Yeah, I'll see you later.
Yes.
And I'll wrap up here.
So nice being with you all. I'll see you next week.
Goodbye, Margaret. Good to see you.
Just grab all my things.
Also, though, changing your sleep, changing your diet, changing your habits of exercise and whatever, that is also a task that requires resources. Those things don't happen automatically. What's happening right now is what's happening automatically. And as well as with the medication, it's very useful to start by paying attention, get a baseline. What is it that happens before I put any intention towards or make any specific efforts to change anything? Because I want to monitor what happens as a result of those efforts. Does it get me closer to where I want to be or further away? I can only know that if I start with, where am I starting? Instead of starting at a place where I just have an assumption about where I should be and I am not. That's the problem. Like if I'm not at that, getting closer to that is better. But if I don't know where I'm at right now, it's just not that, then I don't know if I'm closer or further away. So you're doing what you do for a reason. Pay attention to that. If you want to do other things that you're not doing or more of something than you're currently doing, know that you've got to make a trade-off with something else that you're cutting. And that is a big and important part of the process when you're intellectually designing a change. I want to do more X. then you should also be saying, what is it that I am going to give up in order to be able to do that? If we just hope that by wanting it enough, I'll do it, it's not that that doesn't happen. Sometimes, frequently, if I'm like, I'm going to do this, I end up doing it. If I don't think about where I'm pulling those resources from, they just get pulled from places. And sometimes that works great. Sometimes I am giving up on something else that was also important and it causes problems. Ugh, I hate trying to track feelings. Well, I get that. And of course, what I would say is start by trying to track actions. What is it that you do? In fact, here's an exercise that I give people. I'll do this quickly and then we'll wrap up. Draw a circle on a piece of paper. That's a pie chart. Divide up that pie chart however you want. There's no like specific, do it exactly this way. Divide up that pie chart to show how you currently spend your resources. Of all the resources that you have, I feel like my interoception is awful. It quite possibly is. In fact, I'd say it quite likely is, which is part of what I'm talking about. If we're approaching all this the way that we are, the way I'm talking about it, the way we're talking about it, we're people who are approaching this, at least right now, cognitively, which likely means that we are people who approach things cognitively in a general sense, and therefore are relying on intellect about this would be a good thing to do, as opposed to relying on an impulse of like wanting to do or not do the thing. And that's part of the problem. If I make plans intellectually without accommodating for the information that I just am not picking up on, it might work, it might not, it might make things worse. So start by observing the thing that's easy to observe, which is actions. So draw this circle. It's a pie chart. All of the resources that you spend, and again, I'm not giving more detail about that right now, just all of the resources you have and that you spend, this pie chart represents all of them. Divide it up into what those resources are going to. This amount is going to work. This amount is going to whatever, right? Now, take another piece of paper, draw a new circle, and do the same thing, but this pie chart is where you want your resources to be going to. This is your ideal, optimal, like, on my current pie chart, I spend 20% of my resources just worrying about stuff. On the new pie chart, I want to spend 0% of my resources worrying about stuff or whatever. What you'll notice, obviously, by this process, without me having to say it, is you can't put a reduction in there, right? If one slice of the pie is smaller or disappears, that means some other slice of the pie either appeared that didn't used to be there or got bigger. And that's what we're doing. You want to focus in on what is it that I want to be doing instead, and then looking between those two things and saying, okay, what is it that has to get squeezed out? There is, and this sucks, everybody hates to acknowledge it, there is, at least in theory, a limit where no matter what you do now, no matter what you think, no matter what skills you acquire, like there's a limit to how much you can do. You can't always squeeze more. You can't get blood from a stone or water from a stone. I think it's blood from a stone is the saying. And so that can be unfortunate, but it doesn't make it untrue. 0 is a big goal, yeah. And we need to accommodate for that. We need to make plans based around the truth, the reality that we are limited, finite. We can only do so many things. We cannot like that. That can genuinely cause problems. In fact, it does. People literally die because they cannot survive in whatever context it is that they're in. It sucks. It's also true. And if you make plans with the assumption that like, if I try hard enough or if I figure out the right solution, I can accomplish anything, then you're setting yourself up for problems. That's not to say don't try anything, because you never know. Maybe you can accomplish it. Just bake into this that like, just because I think it's a good idea doesn't necessarily mean it is. Just because I think that it's possible doesn't mean that it is. Just because I like it doesn't mean it's beneficial. Just because I dislike it doesn't mean that it is harmful. Although it is true that if I enjoy something, it's more likely that that thing is beneficial. And if something hurts, it's more likely that that thing is harmful. There are obvious and important exceptions to that come up all the time. I got to go. Good to see you all. Good to be with you all. We'll be back at the same time next week. Thank you.